At 6 a.m. on a brisk autumn morning in Meridian, at Alderbrook International Terminal, a vast, modern facility with soaring glass facades and gleaming polished floors, a subtle tension began to unfurl. Tiana Morgan, a dignified yet resolute traveler with deep mahogany skin and eyes that had witnessed too many injustices, strode confidently toward the exclusive check-in counter reserved for first class. Clad in a tailored navy peacoat and carrying a sleek leather briefcase, she was the epitome of grace under pressure. But today, the routine of travel was about to morph into a confrontation that would shake the core of an entire institution. As Tiana approached the counter, she was greeted not with the warm smile or courteous nod reserved for distinguished passengers, but with a cold, dismissive glare. Before she could utter even a single word, a sharply dressed security agent, his expression hardened by habit and prejudice, abruptly grabbed her arm. "This area is for privileged passengers only," he snapped, his voice echoing off the vast terminal ceiling. His words were not merely a statement of policy, they were an accusation, a declaration that Tiana, with her impeccable credentials and international stature, was in some way unworthy of her rightful status. In that instant, a hush fell over the bustling terminal. Travelers paused mid-conversation, their eyes darting between the commotion and the subdued drama unfolding at the counter. Tiana's face remained stoic, but behind her composed exterior, shock and hurt churned like a storm. Without arguing or raising her voice, a choice born from years of having to temper her dignity in the face of injustice, she slowly extended her boarding pass. The paper, emblazoned with gold-embossed details of her reserved seat, seemed to mock her silence as it fluttered in the sterile air. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The agent's eyes, which had already deemed her passage unauthorized, flicked toward another employee stationed nearby, a man with indifferent eyes who shifted uncomfortably as if he were witnessing an inevitable, scripted scene. Tiana's heart pounded steadily as she sensed that this incident was not about a boarding pass at all, it was about power, a demonstration of who held the reins in this meticulously orchestrated system. The supervisor, a self-assured figure in the uniform of Alderbrook's elite service crew, soon joined the scene. His expression carried a smugness that belied the severity of the situation. "We'll need to re-verify your credentials," he declared in a tone that brooked no discussion, his voice loud enough for nearly everyone at the counter to hear. Even as security staff moved to cordon off the area, Tiana could feel the chill of exclusion, an invisible barrier that marked her as an outsider in what should have been a sanctuary of elite travel. Every minute in that moment deepened Tiana's internal turmoil. It wasn't just the public humiliation, it was the realization that despite her impressive track record, international negotiations, boardroom triumphs, and accolades in global business, she was being reduced in the eyes of those who believed in maintaining an archaic hierarchy based solely on superficial distinctions. Her presence in the terminal was not being recognized as that of a powerful investor whose decisions influenced the future of companies far beyond the confines of any boarding gate. Instead, she was being sidelined, treated as if her very existence was a threat to the status quo. Tiana's mind whirled with recollections of past rejections and dismissals, times when her competence was undermined by an unspoken bias. Each slight, each cold stare, each curt instruction from those who guarded the gate to elite privileges, was a reminder that in this world, power was arbitrated not just through credentials and achievements, but also through the color of one's skin and the assumptions that accompanied it. In that charged moment, the terminal became a stage for a quiet yet seething battle, a battle where dignity and injustice faced off in a silent war that reverberated through every corner of the grand hall. She stood there, her composure intact despite the whirlwind of emotions, embodying the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be diminished by those who believed they had an unassailable right to decide who belonged. Her inner resolve was a beacon, a determination to rise above the scorn, to reclaim the narrative that had so far been dictated by prejudice and discrimination. Tiana's mind raced with strategies, each thought a spark of defiance that illuminated the dark crevices of systemic injustice. As the agent reluctantly released her arm and gestured for her to step aside, a wave of resignation mixed with an undercurrent of defiance coursed through her. She heard snippets of whispered commentary from bystanders, comments that brushed past her like cold wind. None of them dared to speak up, for in that moment, silence was the language of complicity. In the back of her mind, Tiana wondered, was this a singular lapse in courtesy, or a deliberate act of exclusion designed to dehumanize her? The question burned quietly, festering in the background of every interaction that followed that fateful moment. Every detail seemed amplified, the sterile scent of disinfectant mixed with the subtle odor of anxiety, the mechanical hum of the fluorescent lights overhead juxtaposed with the tumult of her emotions. The surrounding environment, with its sleek design and meticulous order, suddenly felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to remind her that she did not belong. Yet amidst this suffocating atmosphere of bias, Tiana's spirit remained unyielding. She walked slowly towards the exit of that particular check-in lane, her steps deliberate and measured. With each step, she reaffirmed her resolve. No matter how many obstacles or humiliations were engineered to strip away her dignity, she knew she possessed the intrinsic power to challenge them, to force a reckoning within the very institution that prided itself on order and efficiency. The cold indifference of the terminal, the unspoken agreements of exclusion among the staff, and the palpable tension in the air were all elements of a system that had systematically marginalized those who did not conform to its narrow standards of worthiness. In the quiet aftermath of the initial assault on her dignity, Tiana felt the weight of history pressing down upon her. She was not just a solitary traveler facing a momentary lapse in service, she was the embodiment of countless others who had been sidelined, marginalized, and ignored by institutions that declared themselves paragons of excellence. In this microcosm of bias, the cruelty of discrimination was writ large, a stark reminder that even in a world of sophisticated technology and streamlined processes, the human capacity for prejudice lingered. Her thoughts drifted to the possibilities that lay ahead. Would she fight back, using her hard-earned expertise and keen strategic insight to force the hand of those responsible for this calculated injustice? Or would she, like so many before her, be coerced into silence by the weight of a system rigged against her? Her eyes, reflecting a quiet fire, surveyed the terminal with both sorrow and determination. The exquisite injustice of the moment transformed into a crucible for change, a catalyst that would, in time, reshape the very notion of privilege in travel. In that pivotal moment, while the world around her carried on with its placid normalcy, Tiana Morgan silently vowed that she would not allow this incident to be the final word on her worth. With every graceful step away from the humiliating encounter, she was drafting the prologue to a larger battle, a battle that would see the scales of power meticulously rebalanced, one undeniable act of resistance at a time. Her gaze shifted upward briefly, catching the eyes of a few onlookers, passengers who had silently borne witness to her ordeal. In those brief moments, she recognized a shared empathy, a quiet solidarity that many in that waiting crowd might have felt but dared not express. They saw her not as a troublemaker, but as someone who dared to claim the dignity that was her right by birth and by merit. Her inner monologue was a symphony of resilience, the subtle recognition of failure by those in power, juxtaposed with the undeniable truth of her own capabilities, and a simmering promise that her silence today would be the precursor to a louder, more insistent call for justice tomorrow. Every suppressed emotion, every carefully measured breath in that moment, was a declaration that she would not be erased. For those few breathless seconds, the terminal pulsed with a tension that transcended the mundane routine of travel. The elegance of the space was marred by the raw display of prejudice, a stark narrative of exclusion that clashed violently with the modernity that the terminal sought to exude. And yet, amid the stifling air of indignity, a spark of hope flickered in Tiana's chest, a hope that today's injustice could be the harbinger of radical change. The echoes of the agent's harsh words still reverberated in her mind as she turned to leave the counter, her figure gradually receding into the bustling corridor of the terminal. With every step, she carried the weight of a silent promise, a promise that she would not allow herself, or those like her, to be diminished by the transient cruelty of biased authority. This moment, painful as it was, would be etched in her memory not as the day she was broken, but as the day she began to forge an unbreakable resolve. What do you think? Have you ever experienced a moment when injustice ignited a fire inside you? Share your thoughts below. In the wake of that searing encounter at the exclusive check-in counter, the vibrant hum of Alderbrook International Terminal in Meridian had transformed into a stage where the quiet revolution of resistance was about to take its next turbulent act. Tiana Morgan had left behind the cold glare of disdain and the echo of prejudiced commands, but the reverberations of that moment continued to swell around her like an unseen storm. As she walked away from the counter, every step carried a mix of inner sorrow and burning determination. The sleek corridors of the terminal, which once embodied the glamour of modern travel, now seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of subversion. The pristine walls and polished floors, symbols of efficiency and order, no longer felt welcoming. Instead, Tiana sensed them as silent witnesses to every slight imposed by those who guarded their fortress of elitism with unwavering indifference. Shortly after her departure from the check-in area, Tiana made her way to the security checkpoint. Here, the hum of scanners and the murmur of collected chatter provided an unsettling background as she joined the steady flow of passengers. Every glance she caught seemed to harbor a secret judgment, a tacit approval of the injustice committed against her moments earlier. The security agents, whose eyes scanned not only her belongings but also her very presence, moved mechanically through the ritual. They checked documents, tagged luggage, and processed passengers with an air of detached professionalism that hid a subtle personal bias. Tiana's heart pounded in her chest, not solely from the physical exertion but from an inner conflict as well, a simmering defiance that threatened to burst forth with every pricked nerve of humiliation. As she reached the checkpoint, a particularly young agent named Marcus, with an earnest yet impassive face, scanned her boarding pass. His eyes hesitated for a split second longer than necessary as he glanced at her ID, a moment filled with unspoken calculation. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of an indelible rule, "you've been randomly selected for a standard screening." Tiana's mind raced. Screenings, it seemed, were no longer random at Alderbrook, they were calculated measures to strip away the dignity of certain travelers. She could feel the cold scrutiny of unseen cameras and the inner hum of a system that had decided her fate without due cause. A ghost of anger flared inside her, tempered by years of restraint. With measured calm, she followed Marcus into the additional screening lane. The experience that followed was reminiscent of a well-rehearsed performance in which every act seemed designed to diminish her. Her belongings, particularly the sleek laptop and confidential documents tucked in her briefcase, were scrutinized with an efficiency bordering on callousness. One of the agents, a woman with a perfunctory smile that never reached her eyes, remarked dismissively, "You handle sensitive materials, don't you, Ms. Morgan? That much paperwork seems a bit excessive." Her tone was mocking, a subtle indictment that echoed not just her skepticism about Tiana's professional acumen, but also a larger, more pernicious doubt about her identity. Tiana's pulse quickened, but externally, she maintained the composure of a seasoned businesswoman. Each word, each gesture was measured with precision. Inside, every slight was catalogued, a list of microaggressions that in time might merge into a chorus of protest. Although the conversation was brief, it left a sting of humiliation that was impossible to ignore. Emerging from the additional screening, Tiana navigated her way to the main concourse where the environment was rife with the contradictory symbols of modern luxury and harsh control. On one side of the terminal, luminous screens displayed flight statuses in sparkling digital fonts, while on the other, a cadre of uniformed staff moved with the disconcerting efficiency of well-trained cogs. The space was designed to impress, to convey a sense of effortless superiority, yet for Tiana, it now resonated with the rhythmic sound of exclusion. In a quiet corner, she paused. The ebb of surrounding voices and the distant rumble of announcements gave her a moment to reflect and recharge. Her thoughts turned to the irony of it all. She was a woman who had shaped major financial decisions on a global scale, yet here, her expertise was reduced to a number on a boarding pass. How could a system so advanced in technology and efficiency harbor such deep-seated prejudice? The question echoed in her mind, mingling with the persistence of her determination. Gathering herself, Tiana approached one of the self-service kiosks near the boarding gate to retrieve what she believed was her rightful place among the elite travelers. With calm resolve, she tapped in her confirmation number, her name, and her identification credentials. The machine flashed briefly before printing a boarding pass that seemed to her like a final, damning blow, a seat assignment in economy class, a reduction from the honor of first class to the anonymity of a middle seat in a crowded section. The cold paper bore her name and a number that sat uncomfortably close to the lavatories. Her mind reeled. Each successive act of exclusion was not merely an oversight or a clerical error, it was a deliberate recalibration of her status, a systematic erasure of her authority and achievements. The self-service kiosk, an emblem of modern convenience, had become in her hands a symbol of how precisely the system could reclassify and relegate an individual based solely on prejudice. She crumpled the printed boarding pass with a trembling hand, the fine paper a casualty of a well-engineered dehumanization. The hostile environment was compounded by the increasingly indifferent reactions of the staff. At the lounge, where solace was meant to be found, Tiana presented her credentials only to be met with an apologetic yet inflexible response: "Your lounge access has been revoked." The word echoed in her ears, each syllable a reminder of how thoroughly she was being stripped away from the comfort, status, and acknowledgement that had defined her professional life. In that moment of acute betrayal, Tiana's spirit teetered on the brink. But within her, a spark of resistance burned brighter than the despair of exclusion. She glanced around, noticing the furtive glances of some passengers, the furtive nods of those who recognized in her struggle a reflection of their own hidden indignation. The terminal was a microcosm of a society in which the privileged quietly ensured their hegemony while others fought for recognition in silence. Tiana resolved to reclaim her dignity, to ensure that this transformative moment was not absorbed into the anonymity of everyday routine. Drawing upon her profound inner strength, she began compiling mental notes of every incident: the dismissive tone of the check-in agent, the cursory look of the security officers, the indifferent rejection at the lounge, all etchings on her soul that would fuel her determined comeback. She noted the subtle details, the way the fluorescent lights cast long, accusatory shadows, the sound of hushed whispers among fellow travelers, and the unyielding coldness of digital systems designed to erase her presence. Her heart pounded with the rhythm of impending action. The injustice was not merely personal, it was systemic, a quiet, insidious mechanism designed to marginalize those who dared to defy its unspoken rules. With a firm resolve, Tiana decided that this encounter would mark the beginning of an uprising, a revelation of the cruelty that had been allowed to flourish behind screens and signed protocols. She would gather the evidence, document every discriminatory act, and ensure that the narrative of exclusion was not only heard but challenged at every level. With deliberate steps, Tiana moved toward a discreet seating area near a service desk. She pulled out her smart tablet and began to dictate notes, recording the time, details of interactions, and the names of those whose actions had contributed to her humiliation. Every detail was a brushstroke on the canvas of a case that would demand accountability. In her careful annotation, she captured the nuances, the micro-expressions, the half-spoken remarks, the unwritten rules that governed the behavior of the staff. This documentation, she knew, would serve as undeniable evidence of the pervasive prejudice within the system. Her thoughts turned to the importance of solidarity. In the small moments when she caught the eye of another traveler, a young man in a faded blazer, perhaps a fellow business professional, there was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that the system had, in its relentless drive for control, devalued human dignity. That unspoken connection strengthened her resolve even further. Tiana wondered how many others had quietly borne the brunt of such indignities, their stories buried beneath layers of bureaucratic indifference. Was it possible to awaken a collective courage, to have the silent majority rise against such injustice? As the minutes turned into an hour, the terminal's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. The incessant clatter of rolling suitcases and the routine exchanges of greetings were now punctuated by the weight of a broader crisis, a crisis of ethics and identity that transcended the boundaries of a single boarding gate. Tiana felt as though she were not simply a passenger fighting for her rightful place, she was a beacon for a multitude of unseen voices that had been relegated to the margins. Her struggle was becoming a symbol, a spark that could ignite a much larger conversation about the true meaning of dignity, respect, and human worth. In the murmur of the waiting crowd, she distinctly heard a gentle, almost imperceptible voice, someone muttering softly about the injustice, questioning the morality of the system before them. It was as if her defiance had awoken a latent empathy within the hearts of many, a solidarity that had long been suppressed by the veneer of modern efficiency. The realization filled her with a bittersweet hope. In that moment of fierce isolation, she was not alone, others shared the pain and the determination to resist this systematic erasure. Gazing at the horizon beyond the glass walls of the terminal, Tiana allowed herself a fleeting moment of introspection. The rising sun cast a golden light over Meridian, a stark contrast to the darkness of the human prejudice she was fighting against. It was a reminder that even in the bleakest moments, hope could be found in the promise of a new day, in the assertion of one's undeniable right to be seen and heard. With her thoughts filled with the promise of retribution and reform, Tiana renewed her quiet campaign for justice. She vowed to not only reclaim her own dignity but also to serve as a catalyst for change. That boarding pass, those dismissive glances, and the cold mechanical routines of Alderbrook International had all been weaponized against her. But now, in the quiet confines of her resolve, those very acts would be transformed into instruments of accountability. Every piece of evidence she gathered, every instance of injustice she recorded, was a step toward exposing a system built on inequity. In the silent rebellion of her pen strokes and digital notes, Tiana was writing a manifesto of truth, a declaration that the time for passive acceptance was over. Soon, the accumulated weight of her documented experiences would demand not only attention but a radical reconfiguration of the protocols that had sanctioned such humiliation. As she sat in that secluded corner, Tiana's determination crystallized. The memory of the counter where her dignity had first been challenged was no longer a source of bitterness, it was now the driving force behind her quest for reform. The injustice she had experienced was the spark that would ignite a far-reaching demand for change, not just at Alderbrook International, but across every institution that cloaked discrimination in the guise of routine protocol. How would you confront an institutional injustice if you were in Tiana's shoes? Share your thoughts below. In the echoing corridors of Alderbrook International Terminal, where sleek modernity had once promised seamless luxury, the atmosphere had now transformed into an arena of simmering defiance. Tiana Morgan, determined and resolute after her initial assault on her dignity, began to realize that the injustice she suffered was not an isolated incident, it was part of a deeply entrenched system designed to marginalize those who dared to defy an unyielding status quo. With her every step, she wove together fragments of a story that demanded to be told, sparking a movement that was beginning to rise from the shadows of indifference. After the humiliation at the self-service kiosk, Tiana had spent the ensuing moments in solitude, recording every detail on her tablet, the names she overheard, the tones in the voices of the agents, and the calculated glances exchanged among the staff. Her meticulous documentation became her shield and her weapon, a silent declaration that every discriminatory act would not only be remembered but would serve as undeniable evidence against a rigged system. She made a quiet promise to herself that this record would become the cornerstone of a greater challenge to the institutional injustice she was experiencing. The terminal, which for a few tense hours had been a cold, indifferent labyrinth of digital screens and uniformed faces, began to reveal hints of a larger dissatisfaction lurking within its walls. In a small seating area near a bustling service desk, Tiana noticed subtle nods of acknowledgement from fellow travelers. An older gentleman with kind eyes offered a slight smile, and a young woman in business attire exchanged a brief, conspiratorial glance with her. These fleeting interactions, though transient, confirmed that Tiana's ordeal resonated with others. There was a shared sense of betrayal and a quiet yearning for accountability. Determined to forge connections beyond solitary recording, Tiana made her way to a quiet corner near a row of monitors showing flight statuses and travel updates. Here, away from the scrutinizing eyes of uniformed staff, she began to reach out, first with a tentative smile to a middle-aged traveler who sat alone with a thick novel in hand, and then with a respectful nod to a young man typing rapidly on a tablet. In those moments, empathy unspooled like a ribbon, connecting strangers whose hearts were weighed down by similar encounters. They exchanged murmured words about past experiences of being diminished, each tale adding depth and urgency to Tiana's growing manifesto of resistance. Among those listening, a quiet determination was kindled. The traveler with the novel revealed that he had been repeatedly sidelined by the airline system for reasons he could not quite articulate, and the young man, whose name tag identified him simply as Ravi, confided that he had witnessed similar bias during check-ins on previous trips. Their shared experiences, once unspoken burdens, began to form a mosaic of collective frustration, a chorus ready to demand that their dignity be acknowledged and defended. Meanwhile, back at the security checkpoint, the routine continued in a manner that belied the inner turmoil of the terminal. Yet Tiana saw every mechanical movement as a calculated part of a process that systematically stripped away her identity. When another round of additional screening was demanded at random, a new test seemingly designed to further isolate her, Tiana's heart surged with a potent mix of anger and resolve. The agent, with a rehearsed expression of feigned concern, announced that her carry-on had been flagged as oversized. This delay, she realized, was not about safety or regulation, but a deliberate effort to slow her progress, to add another layer of indignity to an already crushing experience. As she waited in a stark, white room, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows over rows of metal chairs, Tiana recalled every moment of subtle prejudice she had endured. Each recorded detail on her tablet was a burning reminder that, in this space, she was seen not as a high-powered investor with a track record of success, but as an anomaly, a disruption to the meticulously controlled system. Yet even in this moment of enforced passivity, Tiana's thoughts churned with strategies. She considered discreetly sharing her evidence with sympathetic colleagues and even filing a formal complaint. But she also knew that the system was rigged against her. No official complaint would be taken seriously in an environment that was structured to silence voices like hers. Her inner resolve hardened into an unbreakable determination. Tiana decided that rather than waiting for the system to correct itself, she would force it to confront its own systemic flaws. Quietly, she began to record additional details, not only in her private notes, but by discreetly snapping photos of digital error messages and scribbled notes on discarded paper slips that referenced her reclassified status. Every artifact, every record, was another brick in the foundation of what was quickly becoming a comprehensive dossier of injustice. Tiana's journey through the terminal soon brought her face to face with yet another moment of deliberate marginalization. At the lounge, where the comfortable seating and generous hospitality should have offered a brief respite, an attendant curtly informed her that her access had been cancelled. The statement was delivered with a level of finality that echoed like a death knell to her prestige, a denial that struck at the heart of everything she had built over years of hard work and success. In that moment, the lounge transformed from a symbol of luxury and recognition into a stark reminder that the symbols of power were not distributed evenly. The experience was so meticulously orchestrated that even as she moved forward, her every gesture and every step was scrutinized, her persona gradually being overwritten by an error code in a system designed to erase her presence. This new layer of indignity crystallized Tiana's understanding that the battle was not simply for personal redress, it was a fight to dismantle an entire infrastructure that orchestrated exclusion with precision. The realization that her contributions in global markets and high-stakes negotiations were being negated in this transient, mundane moment propelled her into a state of active resolve. She began to mentally piece together a timeline, correlating each incident with exact timestamps and documenting the sequence in which her privileges were dismantled. For Tiana, these weren't random misfortunes, they were deliberate acts of marginalization executed with bureaucratic precision. As she sat in a quiet alcove near one of the terminal's information kiosks, Tiana's mind revisited memories of prior journeys, times when subtle biases had been tolerated and never confronted. But now, with every passing minute, the quiet rebellion within her grew stronger, fueled by a collective sense that she was not alone. The terminal's occupants, many of them silently enduring their own battles with indifference, became unwitting allies in an unfolding drama of resistance. It was then that Tiana decided to reach out to a trusted contact from her professional network, someone known for standing up against institutional corruption. She typed a concise, yet resolute message on her encrypted messenger app, detailing the events she had witnessed and experienced at Alderbrook. She sent the file she had meticulously compiled, ensuring that every piece of evidence was time-stamped and unaltered. The act of sending that message was a turning point. It was a declaration that the systemic inequities would no longer be hidden behind pristine counters and digital facades. The records were now weapons, and she was prepared to use them to force the powerful to answer for their actions. Outside, the terminal continued its orchestrated display of order. Flight information scrolled across digital screens, and passengers shuffled between gates with the determined resignation of those accustomed to bureaucratic indifference. Yet within this facade of calm, a subtle undercurrent of tension was rising, a tension that Tiana had helped to awaken. Whispers of her audacious stand began to ripple through the crowded halls. Some employees exchanged uneasy looks when she passed, others shifted nervously as if their every movement was being monitored by an unseen authority. At one point, as she crossed a long corridor bordered by expansive windows that framed the cool morning sky, Tiana encountered a fellow traveler who recognized the unmistakable spark of defiance in her eyes. This man, dressed in a smart suit yet his manner informal enough to betray a touch of rebellion, introduced himself as Malik. He explained that he too had felt the sting of systemic prejudice and that his own experiences at the terminal had left him disillusioned. In a hushed conversation away from prying eyes, Malik shared that he had gathered similar accounts from others and that there was a growing undercurrent of discontent among travelers of diverse backgrounds. In that conversation, Tiana and Malik mapped out a plan, small acts of solidarity, discreet exchanges of information, and even suggestions for a coordinated effort to document and protest the inequitable practices at Alderbrook. The notion of collective resistance, previously an abstract idea, now took on the tangible urgency of an imminent uprising. Their plan was cautious and measured, no overt defiance that could be easily dismissed or suppressed, but it was a commitment to ensure that their voices, and the voices of the silent majority, would not be lost in the hum of the terminal's routine. For Tiana, every interaction, every recorded moment of bias, and every whispered conversation with allies built the foundation of a resistance that was both personal and universal. She was no longer just a high-caliber investor who had been humiliated, she was a symbol of the countless individuals who had been relegated to the sidelines by an unyielding system. Her dossier of evidence was growing, and with it, the determination to shine a light on the injustices that were allowed to fester in spaces that were supposed to epitomize efficiency and respect. As the hours waned and the terminal's lights shifted from the sterile brightness of morning to the softer glow of early afternoon, Tiana reviewed her notes one final time. Each entry served as a testament to the deliberate steps taken to erase her identity, from the unjust reassignment of her seating to the abrupt cancellation of her lounge privileges. The precision and clinical nature of the actions left no room for error. It was clear that a well-oiled mechanism of discrimination was at work. And now, with the evidence securely in her possession and her network of allies quietly mobilizing, Tiana braced herself for what was to come next. In that moment of quiet resolve, she allowed herself a brief pause to acknowledge the gravity of her undertaking. The struggle ahead promised to be arduous and filled with setbacks, but the strength of her conviction, bolstered by the empathy and solidarity of those around her, forged an unyielding determination to challenge the status quo. With a deep, steadying breath, Tiana resolved that she would no longer be a silent casualty of systemic injustice. Every slight, every act of marginalization would be met with a counterstrike, a steady, relentless push toward transparency, accountability, and, ultimately, change. What actions do you believe make the most powerful statement against systemic injustice? The oppressive weight of systemic injustice had shifted from a silent burden to a seething call for action. As the early afternoon light softened into an amber glow over Meridian's Alderbrook International Terminal, Tiana Morgan sensed that every minute brought her closer to a confrontation that could either shatter the barriers of discrimination or bury her spirit beneath them. With Malik and a growing network of resolute allies beside her, Tiana prepared to escalate her challenge against a system that had long thrived on marginalizing the powerful voices of the overlooked. Over the course of the previous hours, Tiana's dossier had grown from fragmented notes into a meticulously detailed chronicle of bias, a trail of digital and written evidence that could not be contested by any amount of bureaucratic spin. In quiet corners of the terminal, colleagues of fate exchanged covert glances and whispered agreements. It was as if an electric undercurrent surged beneath the polished floors and sleek glass walls, a silent revolution ignited by years of suppressed indignation. Taking a deep breath, Tiana left the secluded alcove where she had been gathering her evidence. Her tablet and smartphone in hand, she now set her focus on the heart of the operation, the customer service hub near Gate 10, where the airline's representatives meticulously managed flight schedules and passenger queries. Every step toward that hub was loaded with purpose. It was there, she believed, that a paper trail of more overt discriminatory actions would become impossible to ignore. With each step echoing on the polished floor, her heart pounded not with fear, but with a fierce determination. Upon arriving at the customer service desk, Tiana found herself facing a scene that epitomized the cold rationality of the system. A harried agent, his face pale under the fluorescent lights, was trying to resolve a minor issue for another traveler. When Tiana calmly introduced herself and presented her documentation, a timeline of every procedure that had been denied, every lounge privilege abruptly cancelled, every greeting dismissed, the agent's eyes flickered with uncertainty. His fingers hesitated above his keyboard, as if questioning whether to follow protocol or yield to the undeniable truth that Tiana's experience demanded acknowledgement. In that charged moment, the hush around the desk deepened. A cluster of passengers had gathered nearby, their curiosity piqued by the determined air that Tiana carried. The agent mumbled something about a system error, and directed her to wait while he consulted a supervisor. Tiana's gaze fell on the clock overhead, every second mattered. She observed the bustling terminal as if it were a living entity, each conversation, every light flicker, all conspiring to silence the truth. But she refused to be swallowed by the prevailing apathy. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman with meticulously styled hair and sharp, guarded eyes, approached the desk. Her name tag read, Vivian. With cool professionalism, she asked, "Ms. Morgan, what seems to be the problem?" Tiana laid out her evidence with measured calm, detailing the discriminatory reassignment of her seat, the cancellation of her lounge access, and the repeated instances of arbitrary delays. Her voice, steady and resolute, conveyed not only the facts but the emotional toll of an injustice that resonated far deeper than a mere inconvenience. Vivian's expression hardened as she scanned the dossier on Tiana's tablet. Tiana could see the conflict in her eyes, a battle between the rigor of protocol and the undeniable reality of what was unfolding before her. The supervisor hesitated, clearly aware that the documentation could spark questions far beyond routine system errors. "I'll need to forward this to a higher authority for review," Vivian replied, her tone measured but her eyes revealing a trace of uncertainty. As Tiana stepped back from the customer service desk, a murmur spread among the onlookers. Whispers of solidarity and murmured recognitions of similar experiences floated in the air. For a moment, it felt as if the terminal had transformed into a crucible of shared experiences, each silent voice now finding its echo in Tiana's challenge. The energy in the room was tangible, a convergence of private indignities finally coalescing into a common purpose. In that charged atmosphere, even those who had long suffered in silence began to exchange nods and cautious smiles, signals of resilience amid institutional oppression. Outside the desk area, Malik joined Tiana. His presence was like a steady anchor amidst a sea of conflicting emotions. "I've talked to a few people," he said softly, his tone both somber and determined. "There's a growing consensus that what you're experiencing isn't an isolated incident. Many of us have faced similar scrutiny and dismissals." His words were a balm to her burning resolve, strengthening her belief that this was a moment for collective action. Together, they set a plan in motion. Malik, armed with contacts from diverse backgrounds, ranging from corporate watchdogs to civil rights advocates, committed to ensuring that Tiana's evidence would reach ears willing to challenge a system so deeply entrenched in inequity. They quietly exchanged encrypted messages with fellow travelers who had amassed their own records. A network of reform-minded passengers was forming, an underground coalition unwilling to be relegated to invisibility by the very institution that claimed to serve them. While Tiana and Malik initiated this quiet outreach, another drama unfolded just across the terminal. A group of high-ranking airline staff, including someone from the airline's internal compliance office, appeared to be convening in a private meeting room. Their hushed voices and furtive glances toward the public areas betrayed an unease, a recognition that Tiana's documented grievances could potentially unravel a tapestry of systemic malpractice. Back in the main concourse, the digital screens that had once displayed pristine flight statuses now flickered with unexpected error messages and rebooking notices, as if the system itself were struggling under the weight of truth. Amid this simmering chaos, Tiana found herself approached by an unexpected ally, a seasoned traveler whose unassuming demeanor masked decades of experience in navigating corporate injustices. Darius, a silver-haired gentleman with a presence that exuded quiet authority, shared his own bitter experiences of institutional bias over years of navigating the airline's labyrinthine procedures. "I've seen many like you come and go," he said softly, "but today, something feels different. I see a fire in your eyes that promises change." His words resonated with Tiana, reinforcing the notion that this battle was not hers alone. Each shared story, each voice raised in quiet rebellion, represented a fragment of a larger mosaic of resistance. The tension in the terminal reached a palpable zenith when a sudden announcement crackled over the overhead speakers, a terse message about an unexpected delay due to operational discrepancies. Passengers exchanged uncertain glances as the announcement lacked the usual reassuring explanations. Instead, its brevity and curt tone hinted at turmoil behind the scenes. Tiana's heart pounded. The very system that had reduced her to a marginal case seemed to be quivering under the pressure of accumulated grievances. It was as if the digital heartbeat of Alderbrook International had faltered for just a moment that Tiana knew would not go unnoticed. Seizing the opportunity, Tiana decided it was time to make her voice indisputably heard. With her allies scattered strategically around the terminal, she prepared to issue a formal statement, an impassioned testimony of her ordeal and a demand for accountability. In the privacy of a quiet corridor, away from the prying eyes of indifferent staff, Tiana connected her phone to a secure live streaming application. Her voice, resonant with both sorrow and determination, began to recount the details of her experience. She described every instance of overt discrimination, every dismissive gesture, and every carefully orchestrated delay that stripped her of the privileges she had rightfully earned. The live stream quickly gathered traction on social media, a network of reality that refused to be ignored. Comments flooded in from viewers across the nation and even from international onlookers who had witnessed similar ordeals. The conversation exploded into a chorus demanding transparency and reform. Each shared testimony, shared like a spark in a dry forest, began to illuminate the broader pattern of systemic abuse within not just Alderbrook International but throughout the entire airline industry. Among the messages of support, Tiana received word from a respected civil rights organization that had taken notice of her testimony. Representatives from this group, known for their rigorous investigations into corporate malfeasance, promised to help amplify her voice. Their presence underscored the fact that the struggle was no longer confined within the terminal's walls, it had become a matter of public interest and national debate. Back at the service desk, Vivian's earlier assurances had not quelled the growing unrest. Instead, whispers of internal audits, potential legal challenges, and even the threat of external regulatory intervention began to circulate among the airline staff. The once seamless facade of authority was fracturing as those in power scrambled to mitigate the consequences of a rebellion that was spreading from within the crowded terminal to the broader public sphere. As Tiana's live stream continued, she recalled the cold moment at the check-in counter, the moment when she first realized that her identity was being redefined by someone else's prejudice. Now, every word she spoke was a reclaiming of that identity, a resounding declaration that no one would be relegated to invisibility through the mechanizations of bias. The terminal, caught in the tumult of emerging solidarity and mounting evidence, pulsed with a renewed energy, the energy of a community coming together to demand dignity and justice. In the final minutes of the live stream, as Tiana's voice resonated down the digital pathways, she issued a call to action. "I stand here not just for myself," she proclaimed, her eyes shining through the screen, "but for every person who has ever been told they do not belong. We have the power to expose our truths, to hold these systems accountable. Let our collective voice be the force that reshapes the future." Her words, imbued with both grief and hope, reverberated far beyond the terminal, igniting discussions on fairness, accountability, and human rights that spanned continents. As the live stream concluded, the effects of Tiana's impassioned declaration began to manifest. The airline's internal operations, once impenetrable, were now being closely scrutinized by media outlets and regulatory bodies. Passengers who had witnessed her ordeal now felt emboldened to speak up, sharing their own stories and demanding a reckoning with a system that had long favored privilege over justice. In that charged moment, as the terminal bristled with the promise of collective action, Tiana Morgan realized that the tipping point had been reached. The fight was no longer just about her downgrading at a boarding gate, it was a battle for the soul of an industry and, by extension, a challenge to a society that had allowed such injustices to persist unchecked. With a final, resolute look at the sea of determined faces around her, she stepped forward into the unfolding fray, knowing that this struggle would shape not only her future, but the future of every traveler deemed unworthy by a cold, indifferent system. What do you believe is the most vital element of collective action in the face of systemic injustice? In the final throes of an unfolding rebellion, as the day edged toward dusk and the amber glow of Meridian skyline spilled into Alderbrook International Terminal, the air itself seemed charged with an impending reckoning. Tiana Morgan, now the emblem of a burgeoning movement for justice, felt that the culmination of her fight was at hand, a moment when every secret, every slight embedded in the institution's core, would be demanded accountability. Earlier that day, the digital shout of Tiana's livestream had ignited not only the passion of passengers and bystanders but also alarms within the upper echelons of the airline's management. Behind closed doors in a stark conference room, representatives from regulatory bodies, civil rights groups, and a consortium of affected stakeholders gathered to confront the evidence of systemic discrimination. The dossier Tiana had meticulously compiled now formed the nucleus of a case so compelling that even the staunchest defenders of the airline's antiquated practices were forced to confront a painful reality: the institutional bias had not been incidental, it was systematic. At the same time, within the terminal itself, the atmosphere had begun to change in palpable ways. Passengers who had once been silent witnesses now gathered near information kiosks, discussing among themselves and corroborating one another's experiences. Fragments of conversation swirled through the corridors, a mixture of incredulity, solidarity, and a call for transformation. Even the weary airport staff, whose days had been spent enforcing protocols without question, began to show signs of hesitation. In hushed tones, they mentioned the name Morgan, as if it had become a rallying cry for those who believed that dignity was non-negotiable. Tiana, with Malik at her side, made her way to a quiet back corridor away from the prying eyes of corporate enforcers. There, a discreet network of allies waited, seasoned travelers, empathetic employees, and even a few mid-level managers emboldened by the evidence. They convened in a temporary meeting room furnished with nothing more than a whiteboard, some laptops, and an assortment of hastily scribbled notes. The room hummed with the urgency of a group determined to reclaim not only their own dignity but also the integrity of an industry that had long operated in the shadows of inequity. "We have the evidence, we have the voices, and now," Tiana said, her voice calm yet piercing, "we have the mandate from those who believe that fairness must prevail." Her eyes swept over the faces of her allies, each reflecting determination, fatigue, and the fire of a battle that had been years in the making. This isn't about one boarding pass or one flight. It's about an entire system that has decided who belongs and who doesn't. And today, we turn the tide. Her words resonated deeply. Malik interjected with a reminder that legal counsel and public support were already lining up. "The Civil Rights Commission is reviewing our dossier. We have media contacts prepared to expose the truth on a national scale. It's time for the leaders to answer for their actions." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Back at the Central Operations Hub, a glass-walled command center that had once been a symbol of sleek efficiency, the executives huddled around a conference table. The tension was nearly tangible as the airline's internal auditors pored over the data, their anxious whispers floating through the sterile air. A prominent figure among them, a man known only as Mr. Harrington, presided over the meeting with an air of grim resignation. He had been aware, albeit reluctantly, that change was not only possible but inevitable. Now, confronted with irrefutable evidence of bias and malpractice, his voice broke through the charged silence: "Our credibility is in jeopardy. If we do not act swiftly, the public will seize this moment to write our downfall." As the terminal speakers began to relay controlled updates, statements that barely masked panic beneath professional guises, Tiana's strategic message reached far beyond the confines of the airport. Her live stream and the subsequent social media campaign triggered a cascade of events. National news outlets broke the story, and within hours, the terminals of other major international airports began to see similar murmurs from passengers recalling their own experiences of neglect and discrimination. A domino effect was in motion, and the once impenetrable walls of corporate arrogance began to crumble under the weight of collective outcry. At Alderbrook, as twilight deepened into a cool, reflective night, Tiana returned to the terminal's central atrium. The space that had witnessed so many small cruelties now teemed with an undercurrent of transformation. Groups of passengers were engaged in hushed discussions, and even a few staff members, once mere cogs in an indifferent machine, looked at one another with a newfound awareness, as if silently questioning the status quo. In a far corner of the terminal, a press conference was arranged in haste. The media, armed with laptops, cameras, and fervent expressions, gathered before a makeshift podium. The spokesperson for the civil rights organization stepped forward, referencing Tiana's testimony and the damning evidence she provided. The news broadcast was explosive, detailing every discriminatory act, every arbitrary decision, and the systematic recalibration of privileges that stripped away the rights of travelers who dared to defy an unjust system. Amidst the swirling chaos of camera flashes and rapid-fire questions, Tiana emerged once more, this time not as a solitary victim, but as a representative of a movement. Dressed in a blazer that carried both elegance and quiet rebellion, she ascended the podium. With her clear, unwavering gaze, she addressed the crowd. Today, we are not here to settle for apologies or to quietly fade into the margins of history. We are here to demand accountability from an institution that has for too long confined human dignity to the narrow definitions of privilege and bias. We stand together as evidence, as history, and as the voices of all who have been silenced. Her address was measured and forceful, blending the raw pain of her experiences with an articulate vision for a future transformed by equality and transparency. No longer will any one of us be reduced to a number on a boarding pass. No longer will our worth be determined by fleeting stereotypes or the cold algorithms of a broken system, she proclaimed. We demand an overhaul of policies, a restructuring of power, and a fundamental respect for the inherent dignity that each of us carries. Her words, delivered with the cadence of a seasoned leader, reverberated through the hall and echoed across the digital landscape. The fallout was immediate and monumental. Regulatory bodies announced comprehensive audits of airline practices nationwide. The airline's board of directors convened an emergency session, and within days, a high-ranking executive was dismissed amid mounting public pressure and legal threats. As details of the internal memos and covert communications leaked, the scales of public opinion shifted dramatically. The once dismissed grievances of hundreds of passengers now served as a catalyst for sweeping reforms. In the days that followed, whispers of change became declarations. New protocols were unveiled to ensure that every staff member underwent rigorous training on anti-discrimination and civil rights. An independent oversight committee was established, one that included representatives from diverse communities, ensuring that every decision made in the name of security or efficiency would be transparent and accountable. The changes rippled outward. Other airlines, confronted with similar evidence and mounting pressure, began to re-examine their protocols, initiating reforms on a scale that promised to alter the face of air travel forever. In the midst of this tumultuous transformation, Tiana found herself reflecting on the long road that had brought her here. Each small injustice she had encountered, each dismissive remark and each act of deliberate exclusion, had converged to illuminate the cracks in a system that preached excellence while practicing inequity. Her personal journey was now intertwined with a broader narrative, a narrative of courage and collective resistance that had forced an institution to reckon with its own misdeeds. As the terminal gradually returned to a new kind of order, a delicate balance between efficiency and empathy, Tiana stepped away from the press conference and re-entered the now quiet atrium. There, on a large digital display that had once been reserved solely for flight information, a message had been emblazoned in bold letters: dignity, equality, transparency. It was a simple statement, yet profoundly powerful, a promise that the era of unchecked discrimination was coming to an end. Standing by the glass walls that overlooked the city, Tiana allowed herself a moment of introspection. The journey had been arduous, marked by both bitter setbacks and luminous victories. But in that reflective pause, she saw something far greater than her own personal triumph. She saw the dawn of a renewed industry, one that recognized that progress was not just measured by the scale of profits, but by the strength of its humanity. Her phone vibrated with messages of gratitude and solidarity, from travelers, from employees, and from activists who saw her as a beacon of hope. Even Malik, standing not far away, offered a quiet smile of affirmation. The collective energy that had been summoned in the face of injustice had now transformed into a call for lasting reform, a definitive moment when the power of one, amplified by the voices of many, had reshaped the future. As Tiana began to make her way toward the departure gate for her next journey, a flight not just to a distant destination, but toward a future defined by equality, she felt a profound sense of closure mingled with anticipation. The system had been forced to change, its dark corners illuminated by the courage of those who refused to be invisible. Her story, now etched into the annals of public consciousness, served as a reminder that every act of resistance could become a seed of transformation in an otherwise indifferent machine. For Tiana, the struggle was far from over. While the immediate victories were sweet, the work of ensuring sustainable change had only just begun. Yet with each step she took through the terminal, with each passing moment of quiet resolve, she carried the unyielding certainty that her battle had sparked a revolution that would continue to challenge injustice until every person, regardless of background or circumstance, could truly travel through the world with unassailable dignity. What do you think is the most impactful change that a collective uprising like Tiana's can bring about? In a world where injustice may sometimes seem unyielding, let this story remind you of the quiet power that lies within every one of us. Each moment of resistance, every act of speaking up against oppression, is a beacon of hope that has the power to change hearts and dismantle systems built on exclusion. Today, we witness that no matter how cold the system appears or how deep its divisions, our collective compassion, resilience, and determination can light up even the darkest corners. This story isn't just about one woman's journey, it's about the shared humanity that connects us all, an invitation to embrace one another with love and understanding. Let it inspire you to stand tall in the face of adversity, to support those around you, and to nurture kindness as the most powerful tool for change. When we choose empathy and justice over indifference and division, we build not only a better community but a better world where everyone can truly belong. Remember, your voice matters and your actions can be the catalyst for transformative change. In every challenge lies the opportunity to be courageous, to turn setbacks into stepping stones, and to remind the world that dignity is a birthright for all. Let's continue this journey together, lifting each other up, learning from every experience, and creating spaces where love, respect, and opportunity flourish for every individual. Thank you for being part of this movement for truth and compassion. If this message resonated with you, if you believe in the power of unity and the beauty of standing for justice, then join our community. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this message with others. Together, we can make a difference.